Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and the mercy and blessings of Allah be with all of you. Thank you all for joining me on this live post. In this post, I want to deal with the question of original sin in more detail than I did on Friday, and I'm replying to AlFadi in his presentation, a long series of videos on original sin, in which he's critical of the Quran. And now I want to show where the problem actually lies when we think about original sin. So let me get started then. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. So original sin. The idea of original sin, Christians trace back to the Bible in the book of Genesis, where the story of the fall of Adam is described. So we want to start there and see what the Bible actually says about this. So when we go there, we see that God created Adam, and from Adam's rib created Eve, and they're there in the garden, and God said to them, you are to eat from any tree in the garden except for this one. So one specific tree, and the day you eat from it, you shall die. Well, as time goes, the serpent comes. The serpent, now it doesn't say Satan, the serpent comes and speaks to Eve and says, well, did God really say do not eat from this tree? And eventually he persuaded her to eat from the tree. And she did, and she saw that the fruit was good. And so she gave it to her husband, and then he ate as well. Now, in popular lore, this may come down as eating from an apple, eating an apple from a tree. But the Bible doesn't say what kind of tree it was. Neither does the Quran, by the way. In any case, so we have in the case of the Bible a very clear indication that it is a tree that bears fruit. Anyway, so she gave it to her husband, and then he ate as well. And when they had both eaten from it, that's when their nakedness became apparent to them. So they started to cover themselves with the leaves of the garden. And now, eventually, God came walking in the garden in the cool of the day, as if like God is having a nice stroll when you see that there's the peak of the heat of the day. That's not the time that people are going to go out for a walk. And then when it cools down, in the cool of the day, God comes and he is walking in the garden. It may be that Adam heard the rustling of leaves under God's feet, so whatever alerted him that God is here walking in the garden in the cool of the day, prompted Adam to go hide behind a tree. Now he's feeling guilty, he doesn't want to face God. And God calls out to him, Adam, where are you? And eventually he says, here I am. And now God asks him, did you eat from that tree? And he confessed. And then God put a curse on the woman. Because he said, the woman you gave here to be with me, she is the one who made me eat it. And God put a curse on the woman that she will give birth in pain, and yet her desire will be for her husband. But of course the man is not spared either. He is given a curse that he will, God put a curse on him that he will have to gather his food from amidst thorns and thistles, and he will have to work hard for a living. From the sweat of his brow he will earn his rations. So so much then for this episode in the I must mention that God then put a flaming sword to guard the tree, so that Adam and Eve could no longer approach the tree, because then they would have to get past that flaming sword. And it seems that God is concerned that Adam and Eve eating from that tree, this is a tree of eternal life. So if they keep eating from that tree, they will be like us, like God and maybe the angels. And this was not to be. So God decided to guard that tree. Now, we can say that there are several problems with this narrative, but before going into the narrative itself, let me just point out that with this story over, the rest of the Old Testament does not look back to this. Like you won't find it in the rest of the Old Testament that some prophet is saying, you know what, we have a problem because our foreparents ate from the tree. This story is not referred back to in the Old Testament. And we have to realize that the Old Testament period is a long period. So if you think about from the creation, now the Jewish calendar dates the creation to 4004 BC. That date obviously is way out of whack because now we know that the earth is hundreds of thousands of years old and maybe 4.5 billion years old rather, and life on Earth has been for hundreds of thousands of years. In fact, and there too, millions of years in fact. And human beings, Homo sapiens, have been on Earth for about maybe 200,000 years and longer. For 200,000 years then, the prophets of God have been coming and going, and their preaching is recorded in the Bible. And we won't find in the Bible that one of these prophets is saying, you know what? We have a problem because our forefathers, our foreparent ate from the tree. Adam and Eve ate from the tree, and therefore we are in a problem now. Nobody says that. The closest thing we get to this is in one of the Psalms where the psalmist says, in sin did my mother conceive me. But that hardly points to original sin. It may have something to do with the psalmist feeling that his mother did something wrong or something like this. It's not really clear what the psalmist could mean by that. But nobody else is saying we have a problem because of that original sin. It is in the New Testament that we find that this is a problem. In fact, it's not even in the preaching of Jesus in the New Testament. And we see that among the New Testament gospel writers, Luke did not have this idea that there is some sin to be paid for. And the other gospels do not further the idea that there is an original sin which needs to be paid for. So who champions this? It is the writer Paul. In his writings, he says, Adam sinned, and therefore we are all in a problem. The first man sinned, and the second Adam, that is Jesus, now pays for that sin, and therefore, it's all settled. We're good. Now, AlFadi tries to say, well, Muslims are accusing us and saying, this all goes back to Paul, but it doesn't go to Paul. And, but in the course of his describing this, he couldn't help but referring to Colossians, which is one of the writings in the Pauline corpus, and other such writings. It is there, actually, that you find it most prominent. And you will find in some other lesser popular New Testament writings, for example, the first letter of Peter and second letter of Peter. But these are disputed as letters of Peter, and as Michael Grant has pointed out in his book on Peter, these writings are more Pauline than anything else. So it's you cannot credit this to Peter. You have to say that this is something like from the Pauline school, attributed to Peter either by mistake or deliberately. In which case, the latter case, it would be, as you can tell, this would be fraudulent. Somebody saying that Peter wrote this, whereas in fact he didn't write it. So the idea of original sin really doesn't owe itself to this passage in the Bible by itself. It's Paul's reinterpretation of this passage. Prophets have been coming for hundreds of thousands of years, but nobody said that this story means that we have a problem. The story was there, but it didn't mean that we have a problem. Nobody said that this is original sin. Now let's get back to the story itself. Now, We've already hinted at one problem, that the serpent is mentioned but not Satan. So this means that the serpent is shown to be a creature who speaks. This serpent is intelligent and comes and talks to Eve and then convinces her to eat from the tree. Now when God came and put a curse on everybody, he put a curse on the serpent as well. Well, the curse on the serpent was that the serpent would have to crawl on its belly and eat dust. I'm sure that Christians have a way of explaining this, but at first glance you may wonder, did the serpent previously walk on legs? Like, what does it mean? From now on you'll have to crawl on your belly. Because you might think that the curse would mean that some ability that the serpent had previously is being taken away by the curse. So what is that ability? Did the serpent in the first place walk on legs, and now that ability is being taken away? God knows best, and I'm sure that Christians have a way of explaining this. But I'm just outlining for you the various problems that are there. Problems that I think that AlFadi, with his great intelligence, should have been alert to. And he should highlight these problems and show us how he deals with these problems, rather than turn to the Quran, which, as we will see when we turn to it, is actually a solution to the various problems and difficulties that are there in the biblical story. Nonetheless, let's continue. The serpent had said to the woman did God really say that the day you eat from this tree you will truly die? No, you wouldn't truly die. And it turns out that the serpent was right, because Adam ate from the tree and he didn't die. He went on to live for a ripe old age of 930 years. Now one might answer that by saying, well, a day with the Lord is 1,000 years, so Adam still died within the one day. But that seems a bit of a stretch. And nonetheless, that answer exists. But you might see at first glance that there is a problem with the text saying that God said that the day you eat from the tree you will surely die, and Satan says no, you wouldn't surely die, and then it turns out that Satan was right and God was wrong, at least at first glance. And as I said, Christians would explain that by saying that the day with the Lord is 1,000 years, so Adam still died within the day, so God was right after all. But you can see that there is a problem to be dealt with, and all of these problems have to be confronted. Now, it says that this was a tree of knowledge of good and evil. So one might want to ask, well, does the knowledge of good and evil grow on a tree? Like do you eat a fruit and then suddenly you get the knowledge? Like, how does that work? And as I said, the Quran does not say what kind of tree it is. Now later on it is specified that this is a tree of eternity. So if Adam eats from the tree, he will become eternal like us. And who is the us is not so entirely clear. Maybe some Christians would want to read into the Trinity there, but that's a whole separate problem, and I'm going to leave that for later on. In any case, why should God be afraid if Adam and Eve should become like eternal? It doesn't make any sense to say that God is somehow like feeling apprehensive or anxious about the long life of human beings. And that he would want to guard that tree of eternity by placing a flaming sword at the entrance towards it. So that doesn't seem to make any sense at all. So you see that there are problems at every step, and not to speak about God walking in the cool of the garden and then calling out to Adam as if God doesn't know where Adam is. And asking him, did you eat from the tree, as if God is trying to find out. And Adam thinks really that he can hide from God by hiding behind the trunk of a tree. And then the problem of the woman's involvement, like, later on in the New Testament, Paul will be saying it is not the man who ate from the tree, it is the woman who ate from the tree and then convinced him. They both ate from the tree, but it's not the man who disobeyed, according to Paul, it is the woman who disobeyed. And so the man comes out a little innocent here, and later on church fathers like Tertullian would describe the woman as the gateway to the devil. And we have other passages in the Old Testament that seem to confirm this general idea that the woman is a kind of a temptress. She misleads her husband and gets him into trouble, like we see that with Samson and Delilah, for example, where Delilah is the one who betrays her husband. Nonetheless, that's the story in the Old Testament, in the Bible. And now I turn to the Quran. So what are the problems in the Quran that AlFadi sees? Well, to him there's a problem in the Quran because, Muslims have the idea that the deeds are weighed, and on the Day of Judgment, those who have a greater amount of good deeds will get off nicely. So what about Adam? For this one sin, Adam is being punished, so he sees this to be contrary to the general Muslim belief. But what he is confusing here is the belief of Muslims about how people will be judged in the life hereafter, and on the other hand, how people might be judged here and now in this life. So sometimes it so happens that one is judged for a particular deed that one has done right here in this life, and the judgment could be immediate. So it's no weighing of deeds in that case. I'm not aware that any Muslim says that for God's punishment to come upon people in this life, there has to be a weighing of deeds. No, AlFadi has confused the matter. It's not like that. Now, I realize that I did not introduce who AlFadi is. I said that in the Friday sermon, but I want to now, in case somebody did not join us then, who is AlFadi? He is a person who is very critical of Islam on the web. He has put out a large number of videos, YouTube videos mainly, and he operates under the title of CIRA International, C-I-R-A. He says that he was a Saudi, he is a Saudi, and he was raised in a village close to Mecca. He went to college in Mecca and then eventually went to study in the United States of America, and there he embraced Christianity, and now he has made it his life's mission to oppose the religion of Islam and to well, maybe he didn't put it in those words, to oppose the religion of Islam, but that's what he's doing. Maybe he'll put it by saying he is there to try to win Muslims over to Christ because he loves Muslims so much and he wants Muslims to be saved. So that is now his life mission. So he's putting out all of these videos. So what else does he find to be a problem in the Quran? Well, he finds that if Adam was created up in heaven, as Muslims believe, well then this is a problem because it's contrary to the Bible. Well, here he is saying that there's a problem with the popular belief. It's not with the Quran itself, because in fact the Quran itself does not indicate clearly. I know some Muslims will be surprised by it to hear this for the first time. The Quran does not indicate clearly that the heaven in which Adam and Eve were, the garden in which they were, that this was in heaven. The garden is just simply described in Arabic as Jannah in the Quran, and in one place Jannatu Adn, the gardens of eternity. But it does not say that this garden, where it was located. The Arabic term garden, Jannah, could indicate even the garden in your backyard. It doesn't have a specifically a religious connotation. So the saying that Adam and Eve were placed in a garden doesn't necessarily mean that it was up in heaven. The idea that it was up in heaven is connected to the statement of the Quran where they're told, "Ihbitu minha," go down from it. But the expression "go down" does not necessarily mean go, from north to south. In fact, in the Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah, it is said that Musa alayhi salam told his people, "Ihbitu misran, fa inna lakum ma sa'altum." Go down to the town, or go down to Egypt, and there you will have whatever you are asking for. So go down to Egypt does not mean go from a higher ground to a lower ground. It's just an expression in the Arabic language, almost like we say in English, go downtown. So go downtown does not mean that you're going from a higher ground to a lower ground or from north to south. It's just an expression in the language. So there's no proof in the Quran that actually heaven was up there in the sky and then Adam and Eve came down from there. So if a Muslim believes that Adam and Eve were placed in a garden right here on earth, that would not only be compatible with what is in the Bible, but also be compatible with modern science, and there's no need for Muslims to assert a further supernatural thing where Adam and Eve would have to come down from a heavenly garden. So what about the idea that this is a punishment? So AlFadi says, okay, so if you say that Adam was forgiven, as I already explained in the Friday khutbah, well then why were they thrown out of the garden? Well, the simple answer is that they were thrown out of the garden not as a punishment, but as part of the unfolding of God's plan for human beings. His plan for human beings was for them to populate the earth, and they were not going to do that by staying in the garden. Moreover, Adam and Eve had to go out and face the challenges of a difficult world and not stay in the nursery of a garden. So if we think of children growing up, and first they're they go through kindergarten, in which all they do is they draw and color, and they play games and sing songs, and then eventually they go to regular school, in which they go to grade school, and now suddenly they have to do difficult work. And of course higher levels of learning still, and more difficulties. So if the child says, no, well, I want to stay in kindergarten because kindergarten is so much fun, we just draw and play and color and sing. Well, of course they can't stay in kindergarten forever. They have to graduate and go into the higher levels. So in a similar way, when humankind was in its infancy, we were kept in a garden. It's a kind of a nursery. It's a training ground for human beings. And in there, God teaches us an important lesson. Watch out for the devil. He's going to come after you. God is going to give you commands, but the devil will always be there trying to mislead you and take you away from the happy state of communion with God. And you have to be aware of that and avoid the devil at all costs. So that was a training that Adam and Eve received, and of course they made a mistake, and that was the way in which people learn. They learn from their mistakes, and God taught them the words which they are to pray, to seek forgiveness. They sought forgiveness, and Allah forgave them. And the Quran specifically says, فَاجْتَبَاهُ رَبُّهُ فَتَابَ عَلَيْهِ وَهَدَاهُ. God chose him and forgave him and guided him, and this is what God does. And He gives us the same lesson, that whenever we are misled by the Satan, we can always turn back to God, and He is willing to forgive us. And so there is no problem in the Quran, and this is not to be seen as a punishment, the fact that human beings are out in the wider world. This is just the unfolding of God's plan. After the few human beings were kept there in the garden, then eventually they had to be taken out of the garden into the wider world to face the greater challenges of the difficult world, and these challenges actually make us bigger, greater, more intelligent as human beings over time. So there is no problem within the Quranic narrative at all, although AlFadi would want to see some problems there. So in short, my brothers and sisters, when we look at what the Quran teaches us and what it says about this whole scenario, we see that the Quran actually avoids the problems that we already noticed in the Bible. First of all, there is no serpent. There is a shaitan who comes and speaks. Second, he doesn't speak to the woman alone, but rather he speaks to both of them, and he causes both of them to fall from the grace in which they were. And so the woman is not specifically blamed in the Quran. The only person who is specifically blamed is Adam, because when the Quran speaks of them in the singular, the Quran speaks of Adam and his sin, his disobedience. It doesn't single out the woman for blame. The rest of the time the Quran speaks about the two of them together being blameworthy. And the Quran does not show that God is walking in the garden in the cool of the day. It doesn't say that this was the knowledge of good and evil, because why would Adam and Eve be prohibited from eating from the knowledge from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the first place? Let's say that there is a tree that from which you can eat and you get the knowledge of good and evil, which we said obviously is not rational to conceive. But let's say that there is such a tree. Why would God prohibit human beings from getting the knowledge, as if getting knowledge is a bad thing? Rather, you might think that knowledge should be encouraged. But as for the knowledge of good and evil, this is already something inherent to human beings. Human beings are already imbued with that natural ability. And AlFadi questions this. Are human beings really imbued with that sort of natural recognition and distinction between good and evil? And the answer is yes. And he is relying on the Bible. The Bible says, you know, there is no one who is not sinning, yeah, not one, and so on. But these sort of sentiments in the Bible, it does not necessarily reflect reality. The rest of the Bible shows that they have been righteous people. As, for example, the Gospel according to Luke, in the first couple of chapters, we have a recounting of the lives of certain saints. This is within the time of Jesus, on whom be peace. People who, or at least in the time of Jesus' mother Mary, people who are alive just before the birth of Jesus, and they were righteous people according to the Gospel and the Gospel of Luke. So yes, they can be righteous people, and that's the Quran's point, that although human beings would be a mixture of committing good and evil, doing good and evil deeds, nonetheless there will be those whose predominant deeds are good, and they draw close to God, they overcome evil, and so on. So this is there in the New Testament as well, and I don't believe that AlFadi has a ground here on which to imagine that Jesus somehow died for the sins of humankind. And of course, if we now come to talk about this dying for the sins of humankind, now we're thrust into a whole a discussion about the injustice of it all, to have an innocent person pay for the guilt of the guilty ones. It shows God to be hard-hearted, because he's not going to relent until his son actually dies. This is riddled with problems. And then if this was God's plan from the creation of the world, as some passages of the New Testament would put it, well then it seems odd, because here God is, well, in Christian understanding now, at least those who think about the Trinity would think that God is three persons, and one of the person is the Father, one of the persons is the Father, one of the persons is the Son, and you have to imagine the Son and the Father are having this conversation, and they're saying to each other, the Father is saying to the Son, you know what, Son, I'm going to create the world, and there are going to be people who sin, and then eventually I'll have to penalize somebody for that sin. Are you willing to do it? And the Son says, yeah, I'll take the penalty. So they have this agreement from before the creation of the world. Well, the question is now, why would God even decide to create a world like that, in which he would have to send his Son to die? It looks like, this is a problematic thing, to think of this Father deciding, even before it becomes necessary, to make it necessary to kill his Son. And then the Son going along with this, and the Holy Spirit apparently is just silently a spectator in this whole affair. Like if we imagine the conversation that must have taken place between Father and Son from before the creation of the world. So all of this is highly problematic. And then if we go to think about who exactly died on the cross, whether the second person of the Holy Trinity died only as a man, or whether he died as God as well. This is problematic, because obviously God cannot die. If he's God, he cannot die. And so maybe only the human part of him died. And if the human part of him died, well, the Son of God from all eternity never actually died. It's as if he took on a body, the way we might wear a cloak, and then after the cross, like he shuns the cloak, and then he is just the way he was for all eternity. So what did he lose? What did he sacrifice? What did he give up for the sins of humankind? It looks like he didn't give up anything. And, it's just problems upon problems. But many of these are logical and reasonable problems that you all know yourselves, and I don't have to spell this out in great detail. So I'm going to turn to your comments and questions, because I'm sure that within your comments and questions, you're going to highlight many of these problems yourself. What I'll do is I'll just very quickly plug my phone charger here to be sure that I don't run into any difficulty with power, and let me be sure that I have this all plugged in. Hold on. Okay, there. I'm plugged into a power source, and my phone is rather, And now I'm ready. Jason Wilson and Najib and Hisham from Algeria, mashallah. May Allah bless you and all of the people of Algeria and everywhere. May Allah keep you all safe from COVID-19 and for every other difficulty and problem. And we have Nailin and Ijaz Ahmed. Stay blessed and thank you, Ijaz. You've made me chill there. Mahdi alaikum salam, and then Daniel and Ahmed and Huruf al-Muqatta'at, the disjointed letters. Okay, so you asked me to comment upon that? I'm not sure. And then Hakan and Naman and Ahmed Nabi Fakiri. I'm going to lower the tripod, lower my camera just a bit so that I can see your comments a little easier. You know, to look downwards through the lower part of my glasses, and without the glasses, I wouldn't be able to read your comments. So, we have Abu Bakr, mashallah, from Nigeria, mashallah, and Brother Abu Bakr, I need your prayers as well, but since you've asked for mine, I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless you and all of the people of Nigeria, keep you and your country safe and healthy, especially during this COVID-19 crisis. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless the entire world and protect us all. Okay, and Brother Munib Zia, all right, Munib, you always have a nice, lengthy, and very informative comments, so I'm going to read that. Salam, it seems like our Christian friends believe that something essential in the nature of man changed, that he became capable of sin. But before eating the fruit, he was perfect. However, how is it possible that man could do something without being given the capability by God? Moreover, the biblical narrative almost depicts God as not in control. Even the reason given as to why they were expelled from the garden was that God was afraid that they will become eternal by eating the fruit from the tree of eternity. So you pointed out something there, Munib, that I didn't actually cover well enough. Not only was the flaming sword placed to protect the tree from Adam and Eve, but also they were expelled from the garden. So a very useful addition there. And you've raised some very important questions there. Why should God be worried about that? Does it look like God is not in control? And if human beings in the first place were created without the ability to disobey God, well then how did they disobey to begin with? Like if the Christians say, and of course we're not talking about all Christians. There are many Christians out there who do not take this narrative in a literal way. In fact, most Christians today do not take this in a literal way. They know that it's actually very problematic. But it is those who, like AlFadi, who want to come after Muslims and say, no, your Quran is wrong, our Bible is correct. So then of course, we have to point out, unfortunately, that AlFadi, my friend, your Bible is not correct here. Look at it and think about it rationally. It doesn't really make any sense. So that's where we're at, folks. If human beings were perfect from the beginning, then they couldn't have eaten from the tree. They had to have that ability to disobey God and eat from the tree. So it was innate from the very start. But we can say that they are given that ability to disobey, but also they are taught how to return to God after such disobedience, and that's what we have as an enduring lesson for us. So we do not talk about forgiving original sin. We talk about original forgiveness and an original lesson from God for humankind. Okay, So David is asking about the divine will, al-qadr. Let me see that, because I know this is a very interesting topic. We dealt with it in some detail in the past video post. So look for that if you're interested in this topic. So Allah is the one who predetermines who goes to hell before the person is born. Allah is the most unfair being in the world. Well, I wouldn't put it that way. I wouldn't say that Allah predetermines that a person is going to hell before that person is even born. I know some Muslim scholars have said that. In fact, many have said that. One might even describe this as a common belief among Muslims, that before the person is actually created, God already decides whether this person is going to heaven or to hell. But in fact, the Quran indicates differently. The entire message of the Quran is based on the presupposition that human beings can make their own destiny when it comes to the life hereafter. We can say that maybe some things are fixed in the life of human beings, some things that are not within our control, but we are not going to be responsible for that which is not within our control. But to say that the ultimate destiny of a person, whether going into heaven or hell, this is already fixed by God. Well, if we said that God fixed it so that some people will definitely go to heaven, that's not a problem. But if you say that God fixed it such that specific individuals are really born to go to hell, well, this seems theologically problematic, and it seems contrary to the Quran. So I have a way of explaining it to get over that common misconception, and to explain that human beings are, in fact, in charge of their own destiny with regards to this, at least this one outcome of their lives, whether they're going to Jannah or Jahannam, to heaven or hell. This is really within the choices of the believer, and it is not something that is predetermined for the person. So your idea that based on this God is unfair, I would agree that if you said that this is a given fact, that God already predetermined the outcome of the person before creating the person, then you might say, okay, it looks like there is a problem here. And in the Bible, this is answered by saying, well, and again, we're in Paul's writing here, Paul says that it's within God's prerogative. He can create some utensils for good purposes and some for bad purposes. So if he created some utensils for destruction, that's within the scope of God's power and his right. So if God created some people for destruction, then that's within God's right. So that's how it's answered in the Bible. And so, but that presupposes, yes, that God created some people for destruction, and it's saying, yes, God has the right to do that. But that statement is not in the Quran. In fact, the Quran shows man sha'a falyu'min wa man sha'a falyakfur. Whoever intends, let him believe, and whoever intends, let him not believe. So it depends on the intention of the person. It is not God's predetermined decision that lands a person into hellfire, not in the Quran. So I wouldn't agree with your statement there. Okay, so thank you, Tom and Danielle and AlFadi. AlFadi seems to be watching, and he's saying responsibly forthcoming. AlFadi, I do look forward to that. That will be a very important and very interesting engagement. So do alert me when it is out. And I don't check so much the messages in Facebook. Once in a while I get a chance and I go look at a whole bunch of comments all at once, but I don't do that regularly. I must apologize for that. I know this is a very bad a practice that, when folks take time to comment on your Facebook page, you should be there to respond. But I hope you brothers and sisters will forgive me. I don't always have the chance to do that, but every once in a while, as you know, I do. But to make sure that the alert reaches me, the best way is to go to our website, islaminfo.com and send me an email through the contact page there, or shabirali.com and send me an email contact there. So that will ensure that I see it earlier. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that, AlFadi. Do let me know when your response is out. Okay, Ahmed Dabi, Brother Shabir, I had a few times read a verse and heard a khutbah, and at the very end, when people are sorted out between heaven and hell, Allah will make those who died believing in Tawheed and... okay, now when I clicked more, I lost the place where I was reading. So, I have to look for it now. Those who died believing in Tawheed and had served their punishment from hell to heaven. Could you share what chapter and verse that is? Thanks. I don't have the chapter and verse with me. It's not in the Quran. Ahmed, this is in a hadith. And actually, I just replied to you this morning and mentioned that it is in a hadith. But in any case, I don't have that hadith with me immediately, like where is it located in hadith. But there are several hadiths which seem to indicate that in the end, people will be taken out from hell and placed into heaven. Okay, AlFadi, thanks for finally paying attention to this serious issue. Yes, of course. I appreciate your humility is always admitting there are serious problems to deal with as the original sin, as the Quran noted it, not just the Bible. Well, AlFadi, no, I don't agree that there are serious problems with the Quran. I don't think I've admitted that. Somehow you're reading into what I've said. Maybe you're hoping for something in what I said to support your position, AlFadi, but no, I didn't say that there are serious problems with the Quran. Of course, all books need some interpretation, so I wouldn't say that the Quran is without any need for any interpretation. And so too the Bible, but the problems, as I've pointed out, AlFadi, is in the Bible. And I hesitate to keep saying this now because you're in the receiving end. If we were in a debate situation, then naturally you would have an equal time to speak, and then it would be fair for me to be saying, okay, here are the problems with the Bible, and then you can come back and say, here are the problems with the Quran, and then you would have a chance to rebut and say that there are no problems in the Bible, the way that Shabir Ali is saying, and so on. And so we'll go back and forth. So I know you're on the receiving end here. I don't want to misuse that privilege of being the sole speaker, but nonetheless, no, I don't agree with you. I didn't say that there are major problems with the Quran. I've shown that the problems are actually the other way around. So, Munib, even before the creation of man, in chapter 2, verse 30, Allah declared to the angels that I will put man on earth as my Khalifa. So Allah's plan was always to put man on earth, and it was not an afterthought of Adam's sin, as it might look from the Bible. You're right, Munib. This is the original plan, and God already announced to the angels, Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. I'm going to place a Khalifa upon the earth. So that was the plan before any sin was committed. So the plan is to place man upon the earth, to inherit and take over and nurture the earth and preserve it for the sake of God. Of course, we haven't done an entirely perfect job of that. We know that climate change is a problem. And inshallah, I hope that soon enough a vaccine will be developed by the grace of God for COVID-19. But it doesn't look like there is a vaccination anytime soon forthcoming for the problem of climate change. So we human beings have to do our part. And I take this moment to remind you all of the necessity of preserving the environment. So yeah, this was God's plan from the beginning, to send man into the earth. It was not an afterthought. And if you think that it was, Munib, I want to support your point here by further thinking about this. You know, the Bible says that Adam and Eve were placed in the Garden of Eden. And then they were driven out, as you described correctly, Munib, from the garden because they ate from the tree. Now, once Jesus came and paid the price of Adam's sin, shouldn't people have gone back into the garden? Think about that. Because if being driven out of the garden was a consequence of the sin, once the sin is paid for, then everything should be back to the way it was, right? We should be back into that paradisaical state of existence. Human beings should have gone back into the garden. But of course, this didn't obviously happen. So what's going on here? Well, the New Testament writers were writing in a milieu in which they had the idea that the Day of Judgment is going to occur anytime now. So they had the idea that Jesus came at the end of the ages. Because think about that. Like, why would Jesus come at that specific time? Jesus would come, let's say that Adam ate from the tree, and right after that Jesus came and died for the sin of the world. So then everything is back to normal right then and there, right? The sin is committed and the death is paid for right away. Well, let's say that didn't happen, and you let hundreds of thousands of years pass, and now Jesus is going to come die. Well, why would he die midway in the life of the earth? Like he would come at the end. Right? That makes sense. So it makes sense to come at the beginning, or it makes sense to come at the end, but not in between. Well, the New Testament writers didn't realize that it was coming in between. They thought it was at the end. So to them it made sense. So then people are not going to go back into the Garden of Eden, which was located on this earth. They're going back to a higher garden. All right, at least 144,000 according to the book of Revelation, and the rest of them will be in a kind of paradisaical condition right on this earth. So the whole earth will be transformed into a sort of Garden of Eden, where the lions are going to play with the lambs and so on. So they thought it was at the end. And of course, it didn't happen this way. It was not the end, and the earth did not become transformed into the Garden of Eden. So this is a huge problem for the Christian understanding, where the debt is paid for, but we don't see that God has actually relented and given us that which we lost as a result of the fall that is described in the Bible. So this is a big problem, and moreover, if you say that if Adam and Eve had not sinned, they would have remained in the garden. I've explained that from the Quranic point of view, it seems that this was the initial plan to keep them in a kindergarten type of existence, and then once they graduate from that, they go into the wider world. That's a natural unfolding of God's plan, as Munib is pointing out here and supporting. Now, if we look at the biblical description and what our Christian friends are trying to build upon that, if you say that they would have remained in the Garden of Eden, well, where is the Garden of Eden located? According to the Bible, it's located somewhere between four rivers. And one might want to place the Garden of Eden between the Nile and the Euphrates, or between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. So this is somewhere in Iraq. Now, what is Iraq today? So if you think that the Garden of Eden was in Iraq, and if Adam and Eve had not sinned, they would have remained in Iraq, well then, all of the descendants of Adam and Eve conceivably would have had to be in Iraq. We wouldn't populate the entire world. All of the people of the world, think of all of the people from all the time of Adam till now, all of them would have to be living in Iraq. And then if they didn't sin, they wouldn't have died, and death would not have entered the world, according to Paul's writing. So it would mean that all of the ancestors who died, from Adam all the way down, all of these people would have still been alive today, and all of them would be in Iraq. And of course the Bible says that in that initial paradisaical condition, the initial couple were naked. So we would have to imagine all of the people now living today, and all of the people who died in the past, all of us would have been in Iraq running around naked. But of course this, it's inconceivable anyway. So there are these huge problems. Now, folks, I want to apologize to you. Our television broadcast in the Toronto area will begin at 2:30 Toronto time, and it wouldn't be good form for me to continue my forum here while our television broadcast is going on at the same time, because we want to encourage people to watch that television broadcast. It's only 1.5 hour per week in Canada, and I know many of you are from around the world. We've already seen Algeria and Morocco and Nigeria and so on. but of course, you can always catch those shows online. Go to QuranSpeaks.com. And that's where you can send us a question. You can view our past episodes. You can also donate for the sake of helping our show to stay on air. But that's an important part of what we do. We have a television broadcast in addition to my live posts here on Facebook. And I would encourage you, if you're in the Toronto area, to watch it as it is being broadcast and aired on television. Otherwise, please catch it online. But the bottom line is I wanted to let you know that in a few minutes I am going to end this live broadcast because I don't want to be competing with our own television broadcast. It wouldn't be good form. So let me then look at your comment very quickly and see as much as I can get past. Bobby, hi Dr. Ali, do you understand the doctrine of imputed righteousness? Bobby, I would like you to explain that to me some more. I can't claim to understand Christian doctrines thoroughly, but it seems that what Christians are saying, my humble understanding is that the righteousness of Christ is imputed to human beings. But of course, all of that does not, I think, get over the problem of the injustice of it all. Suresh, poor Mohammedans, the only way to find credibility for the Quran is to denounce the Bible, which Allah says is the protected words, so pathetic, but so amusing. Well, Suresh, I'm glad that we have been able to brighten up your day and give you something amusing. You know, a hadith says that smiling in the face of your brother is an act of charity, and if we cheered you up, even inadvertently so, then you know, I'm glad. I'm glad that you're happy, Suresh, and may God keep you happy in this life and in the life hereafter. But I don't think your observation is correct, Suresh, to say that the only way to show the credibility of the Quran is by denouncing the Bible. I was responding, as you know, to my friend AlFadi, who before me has already put out a large number of videos, a whole series, criticizing the Quran. So would you say that about your Christian friend AlFadi, that the only way he could gain credibility for the Bible is by denouncing the Quran? I think it is important to recognize, Suresh, that we live in a world in which we are interacting with various ideas, and various ideas are being criticized. The Quran is being criticized, the Bible is being criticized, all ideas are being criticized, and that just makes us all the better informed. So I don't spite anyone for criticizing the Quran, if of course their criticism is pursuing knowledge and rational thought. My only objection is when people sometimes do criticize the Quran for the exact opposite reason that you mentioned. The only way they can get over the problems of their Bible is to turn the attention elsewhere and to say, look, the problem is elsewhere, the problem is with the Quran. Whereas in fact, as we have shown, Suresh, the problem is really with the Bible. And Suresh, since you had a chance to comment, I would expect that your comment will deal with at least one of these problems that we mentioned, even though you will not have the time to type a lengthy comment to respond to all of the problems that I mentioned. But do respond to one of the comments, and this I did not see that you have done. Okay, Suresh, maybe you have done that in your next comment. I see you're saying here, Allah is the origin of all sin, but we are not worried. God will judge him one day through Jesus. I think you got it all mixed up, Suresh. You think that Allah is a separate God from the God of the Bible, and you think that Jesus somehow is that God. So you've got it all mixed up. First of all, Allah is not a separate God from the God of the Bible, and secondly, the God of the Bible is not Jesus. But of course, that's all the time that I have for today's live post, my friends. I want to thank you all for joining, and this means that tomorrow I won't be doing a live post. In fact, I did it today in lieu of tomorrow, but coming next week, inshallah, I will be resuming to the Sunday post. I think that is most convenient for more people, and but do let me know from your feedback as well what's convenient, because I try to balance a number of objectives, my own time, my availability. Because I'm doing it at home, I have to think about the welfare of my family as well, because from where I broadcast, everyone in the house else could be potentially disturbed by my broadcast. So I thank Allah for giving me a cooperative family, helping me to continue this work for His sake. And I thank you all for joining me. But do let me know what is a good time for you. But I've picked Sunday at 1:30 in the afternoon as a balance between a variety of objectives. It also reaches people who are in the Middle East and elsewhere if I do it early in the day as opposed to, like, let's say in the evening. But I'd still like to know what is a convenient time for most of you. So do let me know that in the comments, and I will be paying attention to the comments specifically for this reason. So thank you all again for watching. Jazakumullah khairan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be with you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect you, protect all of your loved ones, save you all from COVID-19. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless the entire world, protect all human beings. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless our understanding, and bless us Muslims and Christians to get a better understanding of each other, to live in mutual harmony and tolerance and mutual respect and love. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us all to cooperate for the greater good of all humankind, so that Muslims and Christians and others will work hand in hand for the greater good, leaving aside our theological differences and concentrating on that which in fact is common among us, and that which will draw us closer together and closer to our Creator and Fashioner, the Creator of the heavens and the earth, to whom we give praise and glory forever and ever. Amen. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you.